Hi, I'm Jack Dennis, and I've got my friend here, Phil Rowley from, where are you from in Canada?
I'm now from Edmonton, Alberta.
I thought you were from BC.
I was originally, spent over 25 years living there and exploring the still waters around British Columbia.
Phil is an expert in still waters. Not only is he a great fisherman, he's a wonderful fly tyer. But today, we're not going to tie flies, we're going to go fishing. And one of the things that happens to me when I go to a place, if I don't have a guide, and many of us don't have, how do we find out information? How do we fish a lake? I don't fish enough lakes. And I wanted to go to a place where there are experts in lakes. And you were kind of tutored by an old friend of mine, Brian Chan, right?
Yeah, Brian's a good friend and a good mentor and a real pleasure to fish with, and he knows his way around still waters.
I call him the Yoda of stillwater fishing. And guess what? Brian's going to be our guest today, and we're going to get some sage, I like that word, sage advice from an old sage, right? Something like that. But we're going to find out in one day about fishing a lake. And the beautiful thing is we've never been here. If we're going to get skunked, I guess they're going to be right along with us, right?
That's right. We have lots of people to blame our lack of success on.
Or success on.
Well, that's what
One thing you're going to learn in the next couple hours is how to become a better lake fisherman. If you've never fished a lake with a fly rod, it's an adventure. And this lake was actually built to be a fishing lake.
It was. It's built on farmland here. It's got wonderful structure. It's very productive, home to a wide range of food sources, and it grows big trout. And as I always say, we always tease our river and stream fly fishers that we measure our fish in pounds instead of inches.
That's for sure. Now, Phil, you've written a book on fly tying, right?
Yep, fly patterns for still waters.
And you've been in videos with Brian Chan.
I have, yes.
And you've lectured down in the U.S.
I have.
So people know who you are.
Well, yes, they do, and I've really enjoyed those experiences.
One of the things that we're going to explore is not only is this a day's fishing trip, but we're going to try to teach you how to fish still waters. And we got to start with the equipment, right?
That's where it all begins.
The rods, the reels, and everything you need for still water fishing. You'll be surprised, some of you river fishermen, you already have some of the elements, but you're going to need a few more things. So let's take a detailed look at what you need for lake fishing. Well, the first part of the equipment has to be the rod. And I know that you could say about any rod that you could use on a stream probably could be used on a lake, but I'm going to leave it up to the experts.
Well, certainly, Jack, just like stream fishing can be quite specialized, lakes as well, and both Phil and I like to use longer rods simply because in a lot of cases we're fishing longer leaders with floating lines. So rods, minimum 9 feet, but ideally 9.5 or even 10 feet. And when we start fishing with strike indicators, it's just nice to have that longer rod.
Why would you want a longer rod?
Most of the time, you want the reach because we may have 12 feet of leader below a strike indicator. And if you're fishing out of a float tube or a pontoon boat, it's just a lot easier to cast with that longer rod. You're just a little bit higher off the water.
Well, you become small like me. So the longer rod does help.
Well put, Jack.
Yeah, well put. Okay. All right, so what kind of actions are you looking for in a rod?
What do you like, Phil?
Well, I tend to favor the moderate action rods. We like softer tip sections of these rods are great for setting hooks with the long leader methods or some of the fine tippets that are maybe required. But you need the backbone in the butt section to help throw the line for some distance, whether we're throwing indicators or faster sinking lines or we're contending with wind.
One of the things I can point out to our viewers is that most of the rod companies now are getting so sophisticated, they'll tell you rods for lakes. There's enough people fishing lake, they'll have that formula, what you're talking about. Okay, we've talked about rods. Is there anything anything else in rods to look for? Just whatever you can afford. I mean, as good a rod as you can afford.
And you're probably going to look for a range, I would say, between 5 and 7 weight.
Oh, it's line size. Gosh, I forgot about it.
So personally, I like the lighter lines for the sport of it all. But there are times when I'm throwing sort of the fast sinking lines that can really load up a rod, 6s or 7 weights. And again, wind is a factor too. So sometimes you need a little higher line weight to manage those certain situations.
Well, no, we're going to be talking about lines in a minute, but when you start throwing some of the heavier sinking lines, you're going to want to throw some of these heavier sinking lines on a 4-weight or a 5-weight rod.
No, some of them you might actually do some more damage than
That's
good.
right, you make it into a 2-weight rod.
Or an 8-piece.
After rods, we got to talk about lines. And lines are very important. Floating lines, obviously, the first lines we had in the modern day lines, and the floating line is still applicable to lake fishing, right?
Very much so, Jack. Brian and I, it's our preferred presentation tool. Floating lines are what most anglers coming over from stream and river fishing are used to having, and they have fantastic application in still waters. With the floating line techniques, we can cover water up to 20 feet deep simply by varying our leader length. So a very effective tool, and one that most anglers have in their kit bag right away.
Brian, which type of tapered line do you?
We often want to get distance, and so the weight forward versus the double taper it just makes it a lot easier, especially for beginners.
Okay, now we've covered dry lines, and stripping a dry line for for moving nymphs and for leeches and other things, not probably a very good idea. We only had dry lines when we started. Then we had sinking lines. Then all of a sudden there was a need for something in between. Because what happens with a dry line when you strip it?
Well, it can, on calm conditions, it can leave a wake that can perhaps put fish off and alert them of your presence. So again,
also wind?
Exactly. The wind we can use with the dry line. We use a number of techniques where the wind actually helps the presentation. So a slight ripple on the water is not a bad thing for a dry line, but when you get into those calm conditions, evening conditions for example, when the wind drops and fish move into the shallows and can be spooky, sometimes that floating line may not be the best choice.
And what do you like after that? That's what, intermediate, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're going to the intermediate lines, or the slowest sinking of lines, and certainly we've got.
Is that what intermediate means? A slow sinking line?
It's often interchangeable now with type 1 or slow sinking intermediate. They're almost the identical description right now. But there's a lot of good lines out now that are slow sinking or intermediate that are clear. The monocore, monofilament type lines, and it just gives us, as you said earlier, it gets us below the surface of the lake. If it's windy or the wind's constantly changing, we regain control over our retrieves, and by waiting by waiting a certain amount of time, that fly line will slowly sink down, and we can start presenting flies in very specific depth zones subsurface.
As you will learn in this tape, the importance of lake fishing is being in the right zone.
And it's all about.
So what it's
the
all
lines
about.
are going to get you there.
Yeah.
And how you use the lines is going to be an intricate part of how your success on the lake.
Yeah. And the thing to remember with an intermediate, sometimes new fly fishers to still waters can be confused in thinking an intermediate's designed to cover the top 1 to 3 feet. An intermediate sinking line will sink to the bottom. It's just a matter of the angler's patience to wait for it to get down. And in most of our applications, it's not about getting our fly to the bottom first. It's about getting our fly down there and keeping it within that zone for as long as we can. And the slow sink rates of the intermediate really make that ideal.
Well, I know that I remember as a young boy the first wet cell lines getting down real deep, and that's our neck line. There's various lines to get you deep. And I think what confuses a lot of people with sinking lines is the numbers. They open up a catalog and they see 30, 40 sinking lines. Let's talk about sinking lines.
Well, sinking lines, as we alluded to with the intermediates, basically if you start the intermediate, the sinking lines go down today to type 6 and type 7 sink rates. You've got to check the manufacturer's...
what are sink rates? You say sink
how
rates.
fast a line sinks in inches per second. And each manufacturer has different densities that sink at different rates for their lines. And as the line weight increases, the tendency is that the rate of the line increases. So in stillwater applications, we're using, in addition to the intermediates, type 2s, type 3s, all the way even down to type 6s and 7s. And it gives us a wide variety of presentation techniques we can use. We can cover water 15, 20, 25 feet deep in some instances. We can present buoyant patterns, English technique following the booby, where we tie flies out of foam and other buoyant materials and use fast sinking lines to drag that fly down to the bottom. The fly line is lying in the bottom debris, and then that fly is creeping above on a short leader right above the weed tops. It's a very effective method.
And you said the key, sinking lines means short leaders.
Exactly.
So that's something to keep in mind too as we go into leaders. We'll talk about that. I'd like to ask the question to you about, as a retailer, people come in, they're real confused. If you only could buy like 3 lines or 4 lines, a lot of these guys don't want to have 12 lines. They're not so sure about lake fishing, they're just entering into it. Guidelines, obviously a floating line, they probably have that for stream fishing.
Certainly number one, floating line, and then I think both Phil and I would agree the next 2 choices would be an intermediate / slow sinking line, and then perhaps a type 3, an extra fast sinking line. Those 3 basic lines will effectively cover all the depth zones that you would encounter fishing still waters.
And also they can give you some other options. You might say to yourself, geez, if I'm only going to fish lakes a few times a year, what can I use these lines for? Well, they can be used for streamer fishing, you can be used for nymph fishing. There's a lot of other uses for intermediate and sinking lines besides lake fishing.
Oh, exactly. The clear intermediates on slow-moving rivers with an even current is an excellent streamer tool. Great for presenting woolly buggers and other streamers, muddlers, those kind of things.
Especially in the cold winter months where you don't want a lot of action and dead drifting. Okay, we've covered lines, we've covered rods. We're going to go into leaders. Take me to your leader. Length of leaders on a dry line. You're going to be fishing the indicators, which we're going to cover later on in the tape. You're going to see us using the indicators with the chironomids. But what about a leader? You know, tapered leader. Are you going to buy a 10-foot, 9-foot, and then tip it from there? Or you talked about leaders being 15 feet lead.
At least. Brian and I have even fished leaders 20, 25 feet, depending on the challenges that we're facing that day. My personal typical setup for my floating line is I will use about 24 inches of 30 thou, 25 thou butt section, and
Right.
from there
Butt sections are important.
Yeah, it helps turn that over. It's still a tapered approach to leader construction. From there, the simplest method is a 9 or a 12-foot leader, and then add tippet from there to cover the depths that you need to do depending on where you're situated.
You know, I get asked all the time, what about fluorocarbon? When I hear about fluorocarbon in lake fishing, it's just a given. I mean, you're going to have fluorocarbon.
Yeah, certainly the fluorocarbon has some obvious advantages over monofilament. It's stronger, less visible, and smaller diameter. And certainly on all sinking applications where you're fishing subsurface flies, you may as well go with something that it's that much stronger, get your flies down quicker.
I got to ask you this question. I had this asked a lot. There's obviously leaders that are made of fluorocarbon, the whole leader. They're incredibly expensive. I mean, obviously you could say you use a leader and just keep tipping it. But can you use a monofilament leader and then use tippets and your sections of fluorocarbon?
That's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, knots.
Yes.
I mean, tying those knots.
Critical.
Yes.
It's critical because a blood knot's not going to hold
No.
it.
No, I prefer personally triple surgeons. So go through that. Go through that loop when you're doing the triple surgeons 3 times, and remember to moisten that knot. And I've had.
And you can make them hold.
Exactly. No failure at all.
And I want to tell everybody too, the fluorocarbons. If you first ran out and tried fluorocarbons 5, 6, 7 years ago, and you weren't too impressed, they are really gotten better. They're much more supple.
Oh, they're beautiful.
And they've come a long ways. So, okay, we've covered leaders. What about X's of leaders? I mean, what should you have in your box for? I mean, you're going to pay $9, $10 for a spool of fluorocarbon. What should you have?
In terms of size, for lake fishing, you need a spool. So just talking about tippet spools, like 4X, 5X, and sometimes 6X. But because
I love you hesitating on
because fluorocarbon is such fine diameter, you know, Phil and I use a lot of 4 and 5X tippet.
And they're going to need some 2 and 3X too, aren't they?
Well, if you have to keep rebuilding a leader and backing up.
Well, what about, you're not going to use a 4 or 5X on a leach, are you?
Sometimes you have to.
I saw the big fish that are in here.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll give you the 3X.
Can I have a spool of 3X,
Yeah.
please?
you get sometimes stuck in a catch-22 situation fishing still waters, especially clear still waters, where you'd love to use a heavier diameter, stronger strength tippet, but fish can see your offering or can sense its presence, and you have to downsize, and now you're stuck. Okay, I can get the take, but I can't hold them.
I know. that happens in spring creek fishing, river fishing.
there you go.
That's common no matter. That's what makes fishing fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about lines that sink, whether intermediate or the full sinking lines. What about leaders on those?
Well, a good rule of thumb on your sinking lines: the faster the sink rate, the shorter the leader. Put you in the park. For
Shortly, how short?
Well, on intermediates, depending on water clarity, again, the clearer the water, the more distance between you need between your fly and your line. But say start at 9 feet or 12 feet on your intermediate lines, and then on your faster sinking lines. What do you prefer?
Well, we'd be going down to as 6 feet on those fast sinking lines on certain applications on invertebrate food sources that swim fast.
And then with the technique we talked about with the booby, sometimes you might be 4 feet. That's somewhat governed by your vegetation. How deep is the bottom vegetation and debris you're trying to suspend that fly above?
We've covered lines now. We've talked about leaders. We've talked about rods. But the last thing is a line holder, better known as a reel. What about that?
Well, certainly, Jack. That's probably the one piece of equipment that, if you had a choice, you don't have to spend as much money on.
Right.
It means holding the line, but you're going to catch a fish for a lifetime, and it's going to take backing out. And so it's nice to have a reel. First of all, it's nice to have a reel that you can buy spare spools for, and secondly, it's nice to have wide arbors. If you look at all these reels we have here today, they're all wide arbor, and that just allows you to pick up line, retrieve line faster. And sometimes you need that.
Yes, I understand that. Okay, so we've covered it all. One of the things I've noticed that you guys carry is a kit bag. What is that all about? Would you like to show us that?
I'd be happy to, Jack. It's basically a small gear bag we take out in our boats, and it carries all the other sundry items that we need and like to have it with us when we're fly fishing still waters.
We'll take a look at a kit bag.
In addition to the standard items that most anglers carry with them, forceps, nippers, all the flies of course, there are a few specialized items that I always like to have with me in my kit bag whenever I'm in my boat on the water. A good selection of strike indicators in different colors for different conditions. Generally I use the chartreuse yellow indicators on overcast days, the brighter indicators on sunny days. We have floatant, there are some dry fly and emerger opportunities, so we want to be prepared for that. We have line sinkant. We can degrease our leaders when fishing dries, or perhaps long floating line long leaders, although with the advent of fluorocarbon not nearly as necessary today. Split shot. There are times when we need to help get our flies down, especially under windy conditions, so a good selection of split shot is always nice to have. Leaders, a good selection of leaders ranging from 9 feet to 15 feet. Good cross section of tippet. 3X, 4X, and 5X is probably a good range for still waters. Over here we have our throat pump, a very handy tool for finding out exactly what trout are feeding upon, but you have to know how to use this tool properly. The whole goal is the welfare of the trout. Read the instructions properly, and if not, get instructions from a friend or a colleague who is very well versed on it. An invaluable tool, but it must be used correctly. We have vials or a container to look at the contents. The white background really helps colors stand out, and you can see some interesting characteristics. Thermometer is an excellent tool. So much of stillwater fly fishing is governed on water temperature, whether it's hatches or fish location. So a thermometer is always good to have, and attached to a string as I have here, because you not only want to see the temperature at the surface, but what it is at depth as well. I have a simple notebook here as well, and my eyes are always open and my head is on a swivel, and I'm always making notes about flies that are successful, methods that are successful, hatches I've observed, anything I want to see, so I can go back and review my notes and build a little library, if you will, of information that can help future outings. Binoculars are a very handy tool to have to look for moving fish, signs of bird or hatch activity, observe other anglers, see what methods they appear to be using and what's working. Very handy tool, so you don't spend a lot of time rowing or paddling around aimlessly. Everything's kept in a nice kit bag that's waterproof. Protect your gear, keep the elements away. And another good idea is just a simple hand towel. Quite often we handle fish and we get a little water on our hands, and under cool conditions that evaporation can really cool your hands off. Just drying your hands will keep your hands warmer longer, and you can be more effective and more comfortable that way. So there's just a few items that you might want to consider in addition to your basic sundry items that you take with you whenever you go fishing, and your time on the still water should be much more enjoyable.
When it comes to stillwater fishing, there are some knots that are different than what you might use on a stream. One of them is, of course, the non-slip loop knot. I don't want to say that too fast.
No, but that's a critical knot for still waters, Jack. We don't have, like a river or stream, we don't have current to help animate the fly, so anything we can do in our presentation to help give our fly additional life and additional fish attracting movement, we want to take advantage of.
And also we're using fluorocarbon, and some of the traditional knots just don't hold with fluorocarbon. This was a knot that will hold.
Oh yeah, it's a very strong knot, and it's a very versatile knot. You can use it from chironomids to bait fish to damsels to dragons. Frankly, it's the only knot I use whenever I'm fly fishing stillwater.
Well, if you're going to be going in the ocean, this is a knot they're going to teach you when you're tarpon fishing or anything like
well,
that.
That's
so
where it traces its roots from. It's very simple to tie. We're using, this represents our hook eye, and the first step is done. We're going to tie an overhand loop right through the line, probably 3 or 4 inches above. Well, anytime you're tying a knot, give yourself enough material to work with. We place the tag end through the eye of the hook and then back through the overhand loop like so. And then to govern the size of the loop itself, we can pull to minimize the overhand loop itself and then pull the whole knot right towards the hook eye. And generally I'll hold both the overhand loop and hook eye together and then just twist this around 4 to 6 times. Generally the finer the diameter of the tippet, the more times I'll twist it around the main line, and then that just gets fed right back through the overhand loop here. And then we just pull down to draw tight, add a little moisture, and this rope's a little resistant, but it all pulls tight, and you can see how tight that and small that loop is. It doesn't matter on your first attempts if you make a rather large loop knot, it still works just as well, and it really works. You can see this doesn't slam shut like a Duncan loop or uni knot would, and it's a very, very strong knot. It's the perfect knot for still waters, and a whole host of patterns could be tied using this knot.
One of the most important knots is the triple surgeon, a knot you need to know when you're lake fishing. Phil, you want to show it to us?
I'd be happy to, Jack. And what I can do too is show a variation that allows you to use the triple surgeons as a dropper as well.
Oh.
So what we're going to do is we've got our 2 lines running opposite directions. This one will represent our leader and this one can be our tippet. What I do is I make sure the leader end of the system is longer and the tippet end is shorter, and you're simply just going to form an overhand loop. We're going to pass both ends through this loop 3 times, hence the triple surgeons. Once, twice, 3 times. Make sure everything's through. Draw, add moisture, and pull that tight. And then when it comes to trimming, a simple trick is to take the join and fold it around your forefinger, and that way everything that sticks out is waste and can be cut, and everything below is the leader and tippet. Now in this situation, because we're adding a dropper to this, we trim the top end here, and I'd leave this tag long, maybe 8 to 12 inches, so I can make a number of changes. And there you go, there's a triple surgeon's knot with a dropper off the end.
Very well done. I was very impressed.
Thank you, Jack. What I'd like to show you now is my personal selection of flies, and you can use these as a guide for your own fly selection. The first box I have here is full of chironomids, arguably the most important food source in still waters. What I have here is a full selection of chironomid larval patterns, often referred to as bloodworms. I have chironomid pupa patterns in a wide range of sizes and colors. Your size ranges are going to be probably from number 18, depending on some of the lakes you fish, all the way up to as large as 8, 2, or 3 extra long for those big bomber hatches that we often refer to, those large chironomids. So good cross section, browns, blacks, greens, my chromies with the silver bodies are a good starting point. Contrasting ribs, red ribs, copper, gold, silver, a whole variety of sizes and colors. You can really go wild and fill a number of boxes with chironomid patterns. The next box I have feature scud patterns. Again, another critical food source on still waters. Here we have a wide ranges. You'll see olive is a very popular color, some with more mobile materials to help suggest life. Size ranges again, probably 16 up through 10, and a number 12 scud pattern in olive would be a good all-around color. It's all right to have a little bit of sparkle and bling, if you like, to your flies to help draw a rainbow over for a look. On this side, a bit more of a focused opportunity, but I have a good selection of water boatman and backswimmer patterns. These generally occur in early spring and late fall, but that can vary on regions and lakes. But it's always handy to have a size range from probably a number 10 down through 14 or even 16. And again, although they're localized, can be some very exciting fishing as fish come up on the surface and take these insects as they return from their mating and egg-laying flights. The next box I have contains a lot of my nymphs, damsels and mayfly nymphs, and caddis. Although mayflies aren't as prevalent as they are on rivers and streams, the calabatus hatch, common to western North America, is a very popular hatch to fish, and when calabatus do occur, they're can be very prolific, so we want to have a good selection of nymph patterns. Beadhead pheasant tails, skip nymphs, my own hurl maze and turkey quill calabatus are all excellent patterns. Over here we have just some general impressionistic nymphs, halfbacks, fullbacks, a little Welsh pattern known as the Dial Bach, little literal translation, the little devil. So just impressionistic nymphs that can be used to suggest a host of different food items. Great fly to cover water with and find active fish. Hare's ear nymphs are a great stillwater fly as well, and so are prince nymphs. Hare's ears can be used to suggest scuds and mayflies, for example. Prince nymphs can be also a great suggestion of a water boatman or a backswimmer with those prominent white goose biots. Over on the other side here, I have a selection of caddis pupa patterns, ranging from very small 14s and 16s all the way up to large number 8s and number 6s for those large traveling sedge emergences. These are an exciting fly to fish and a great way to extend the hatch by fishing pupil patterns. My next box contains the big uglies. I'll just turn it around so you can see it a little better. We've got all of my leech and baitfish patterns here. Some of them are falling out of their places. This fly box gets a lot of use. You can see a lot of different colors, blacks, maroons, purples, browns, olives. My baitfish imitations up here, again featuring the same pattern colorations. These are large mobile flies designed to elicit a strong response from the trout, a great evening pattern when trout come into the shallows and forage, and a great start the day pattern when you're not sure what the food source might be. You can cover water and find active fish, and through careful use of your throat pump, you can then perhaps dial your presentation down. In my leech boxes, generally probably a size is 10 through 6 is a good starting point, although don't be afraid of tying some really small leeches, in as small as even 12 or 14. We call them micro leeches, and they're great to hang under an indicator in the shallow water, especially in early spring and late fall. Don't leave home without your leeches and baitfish patterns. Okay, my last box here I'll show you, as the sign says, are my dragonfly nymphs. These are your big ticket items. The dragonfly nymphs, many species have prolonged nymphal cycles and can be in the water up to 4 years, and this is a food source trout are accustomed to and generally respond well to anything presented in front of their nose. You can see they're large patterns, good overall size. For the larger crawling nymphs, the darners we often refer to them, is a number 6, but I would carry a range of number 10 through number 6, and I even know some of my friends like a large number 4. Again, these are large, bulky patterns featuring rubber legs, mobile materials such as aftershaft or rabbit fur for the bodies. This is just a big morsel that we're offering to the trout. You can also have some of these smaller sprawler nymphs that are more sedentary in nature. They tend to lie in ambush. They're squat and spider-like, and we use a lot of buoyant materials throughout our dragon designs, because to fish your dragons properly, you've got to put them in the weedy areas, and we want flies that are going to foul and be easy to use in those areas. So buoyancy is a key. Again, we use fast sinking lines with these to drag them down and let the fly creep across the bottom substrate and weeds. So a good selection of dragonflies. You can also bring your river and stream dry flies along, elk hair caddis, your Adams, your parachute patterns, your terrestrials, your Chernobyl ants. Those all have a place in still waters. Most of the stillwater fly fishing is going to be subsurface, but you need to have some dries and emergers on hand for those times when they do come up on the surface and feed. So there you go, a quick cross section. Again, you can fill as many fly boxes as you can buy, and that's part of the fun and allure of fly fishing, and especially true in still waters. What I'd like to show you now is my personal selection of flies, and you can use these as a guide for your own fly selection. The first box I have here is full of chironomids, arguably the most important food source in still waters. What I have here is a full selection of chironomid larval patterns, often referred to as bloodworms. I have chironomid pupa patterns in a wide range of sizes and colors. Your size ranges are going to be probably from number 18, depending on some of the lakes you fish, all the way up to as large as 8, 2, or 3 extra long for those big bomber hatches that we often refer to, those large chironomids. So a good cross section, browns, blacks, greens, my chromies with the silver bodies are a good starting point. Contrasting ribs, red ribs, copper, gold, silver, a whole variety of sizes and colors. You can really go wild and fill a number of boxes with chironomid patterns. The next box I have feature scud patterns. Again, another critical food source on still waters. Here we have a wide ranges. You'll see olive is a very popular color, some with more mobile materials to help suggest life. Size ranges again, probably 16 up through 10, and a number 12 scud pattern in olive would be a good all-around color. It's all right to have a little bit of sparkle and bling, if you like, to your flies to help draw a rainbow over for a look. On this side, a bit more of a focused opportunity, but I have a good selection of water boatman and backswimmer patterns. These generally occur in early spring and late fall, but that can vary on regions and lakes. But it's always handy to have a size range from probably a number 10 down through 14 or even 16. And again, although they're localized, can be some very exciting fishing as fish come up on the surface and take these insects as they return from their mating and egg-laying flights. The next box I have contains a lot of my nymphs, damsels and mayfly nymphs, and caddis. Although mayflies aren't as prevalent as they are on rivers and streams, the Calabatus hatch, common to western North America, is a very popular hatch to fish, and when Calabatus do occur, they're can be very prolific, so we want to have a good selection of nymph patterns. Beadhead pheasant tails, skip nymphs, my own hurl mays and turkey quill Calabatus are all excellent patterns. Over here we have just some general impressionistic nymphs, halfbacks, fullbacks, a little Welsh pattern known as the Dial Bach, little literal translation, the little devil. So just impressionistic nymphs that can be used to suggest a host of different food items. Great fly to cover water with and find active fish. Hare's ear nymphs are a great stillwater fly as well, and so are prince nymphs. Hare's ears can be used to suggest scuds and mayflies, for example. Prince nymphs can be also a great suggestion of a water boatman or a backswimmer with those prominent white goose biots. Over on the other side here, I have a selection of caddis pupa patterns, ranging from very small 14s and 16s all the way up to large number 8s and number 6s for those large traveling sedge emergences. These are an exciting fly to fish and a great way to extend the hatch by fishing pupil patterns. My next box contains the big uglies. I'll just turn it around so you can see it a little better. We've got all of my leech and baitfish patterns here. Some of them are falling out of their places. This fly box gets a lot of use. You can see a lot of different colors, blacks, maroons, purples, browns, olives. My baitfish imitations up here, again featuring the same pattern colorations. These are large mobile flies designed to elicit a strong response from the trout, a great evening pattern when trout come into the shallows and forage, and a great start the day pattern when you're not sure what the food source might be. You can cover water and find active fish, and through careful use of your throat pump you can then perhaps dial your presentation down. In my leech boxes, generally probably a size is 10 through 6 is a good starting point, although don't be afraid of tying some really small leeches and as small as even 12 or 14. We call them micro leeches, and they're great to hang under an indicator in the shallow water, especially in early spring and late fall. Don't leave home without your leeches and bait fish patterns. Okay, my last box here I'll show you, as the sign says, are my dragonfly nymphs. These are your big ticket items. The dragonfly nymphs, many species have prolonged nymphal cycles and can be in the water up to 4 years, and this is a food source trout are accustomed to and generally respond well to anything presented in front of their nose. You can see they're large patterns, good overall size. For the larger crawling nymphs, the darners we often refer to them, is a number 6, but I would carry a range of number 10 through number 6, and I even know some of my friends like a large number 4. Again, these are large, bulky patterns featuring rubber legs, mobile materials such as aftershaft or rabbit fur for the bodies. This is just a big morsel that we're offering to the trout. You can also have some of these smaller sprawler nymphs that are more sedentary in nature. They tend to lie in ambush. They're squat and spider-like, and we use a lot of buoyant materials throughout our dragon designs, because to fish your dragons properly, you've got to put them in the weedy areas, and we want flies that are going to foul and be easy to use in those areas. So buoyancy is a key. Again, we use fast sinking lines with these to drag them down and let the fly creep across the bottom substrate and weeds. So a good selection of dragonflies. You can also bring your river and stream dry flies along, elk hair caddis, your Adams, your parachute patterns, your terrestrials, your Chernobyl ants. Those all have a place in still waters. Most of the stillwater fly fishing is going to be subsurface, but you need to have some dries and emergers on hand for those times when they do come up on the surface and feed. So there you go, a quick cross section. Again, you can fill as many fly boxes as you can buy, and that's part of the fun and allure of fly fishing, and especially true in still waters.
Well, now we're going to the aspect of the equipment that takes you to the fishing. And obviously you can fish from the bank, and we'll be talking about that. But wow, we've got everything here.
There's a few options, isn't there?
This is the way I started out,
and
but it was a truck tire.
Yeah, the first ones looked more like toilet seats than they did belly boats.
So what is this?
This is a super fat cat, Jack.
This is the high-tech version of the old float tube.
Yeah, it's the evolution of the craft.
That's right. And that's kind of the basics where most people start.
These are great little boats, Jack. They deflate in a matter of seconds and easy to inflate. You can store them in a car. Really easy to pack around and very portable.
What are the disadvantages of a float tube?
Well, it's mobility at times if you're on big water, just getting around quickly. Also in really windy conditions, you can be forced to have to get out and walk back to base, if you will.
I can think of one as an older person.
Yeah, that's true too.
You're in the water with this, and you can, get cold.
Yep.
I mean, and when you have to go to the bathroom sometimes as many times as I do.
Yeah,
but they are great.
They're
You can sneak up a lot easier on the fish. I've done a lot of work out of a float tube, and one of the things I like about it is you can pack it into lakes you can't get a boat in.
Yes.
Okay, now we go over here to the evolution of the float tube. I've spent some time in these.
Yeah, these are great. These are sort of the next level up from a float tube, and they're very adaptable. Simple setups as well. You sit up a little higher in the water so you can see things a little better, rising fish, see cruising fish, those kind of things. Very stable. You can use flippers with them, or you can simply row around.
I like this.
Yeah, the anchor jack. Any stillwater craft we go in, anchoring and boat control is a must. And any system, whether it's a pontoon boat, float tube, or a boat, needs to have an anchor system.
What I like about this also, Phil, is you can use this on a river too.
Yes, you can. It's very adaptable. So many of the people that are currently fishing rivers and streams find out they've already got a perfect stillwater flotation device right here in front of them.
One thing I want to tell all of our viewers out here, when you use one of these boats, you'll wear a life jacket.
Yes, sir.
Period.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful boat.
Yes, Jack, this is a Spring Creek pram, a small little Stillwater Classic, an 8-foot fiberglass boat, very lightweight, very quiet, very personal. You can you've got good elevation. You can stand in these boats. They row like a dream. Again, you can see the anchor systems fore and aft, so you can really steady that boat when you're working the fly. and you'll notice there's very clean lines, not much in the way of fly line grabbers.
Well, I know this boat. I spent a lot of time in this boat, both on rivers and lakes, the old Pram or John boat.
Yeah, these work very well. Very popular here in the West, especially in Canada. The aluminum Prams, you can get them in sizes from 10 foot all the way up to 16. A lot of guides use these boats for their clients, but same principles again. They're flat bottom, they're very stable. They may not be the best boats in rough weather, but as far as a casting platform and a place to stand and fish all day, they're very comfortable.
I noticed this is aluminum though, and you've put in carpet.
Yes, the one drawback to an aluminum boat is the sound, and water being a much denser medium, sound travels 4 times further or even more, and the carpeting helps muffle our presence, and so if we accidentally drop things or step around, and it also protects the fly line. If you get on the floor, if you step on it by accident, you're not grinding it against metal, you're on a nice soft
I noticed you have a dual anchor system.
Yes, I do, Jack, and it's, again, boat control is so premium. We'll typically, if there's 2 of us like we are going to be today fishing in this boat, we're going to anchor this broadside, and so we can both cast out with the wind at our backs, and we have total control of the boat. The boat is not swaying back and forth and affecting our presentation.
2 modern day additions, electric motor, and
The sounder.
depth finder.
Well, we'll talk to the electric motor first. Many of the small waters, you don't need an outboard, and you know, some of the 2-stroke motors that are still out there today, they can affect the fishing. You know, the contaminants get into the water, and you can spoil your insect hatches.
Just the noise.
Exactly.
And that's, to me, when I talk of still waters, it's the solitude. Where else can you, once you're in a lake, you can get away from people.
Exactly.
It's hard to do that on a drift boat in a stream.
And some of these lakes, like we see with this one here already, how clear the water is, that electric gives you that element of stealth as well.
Okay, but there's also another one. If you're a river fisherman, right behind us is a drift boat.
And those work well, Jack. They're a good, they transfer very well to still waters. They're lightweight, easy to row. Again, you can see the anchor systems on this boat, so you can control the presentation.
Right.
Perhaps the only drawback there may be is obviously it's a trailered craft, so you need a big vehicle to get it in and out, and wind can have fun with it sometimes and spin it around and maybe make it a little challenging to manage.
And they have low profile drift boats called skiffs. Most everybody's making them, and they're the perfect alternative to a pram, and they're built like a pram. And so you can have a little of both.
Yep.
I mean, not everybody in the U.S. Has a boat just for lake fishing, because they're so popular in so many rivers, so that gives you an option having a boat you can take both ways.
Exactly.
And you can put an electric motor on it.
Exactly.
Enough talking about boats, Phil. Let's go fishing. Now, should we start from the shore, talk about shore fishing before we get in the boat?
It's a great place to start.
Well, we've got a bay of the lake that we need to analyze, Phil. I know we got a lot of wind here, but there's some interesting structure here.
Yeah.
To me, it looks pretty boring.
No, but to me, it excites me because there's a number of places I'd want to start. First of all, you've got that narrows and the 2 points that come out. They're going to cause a little saddle, and fish are going to relate to that. They're going to cruise over top of it. They're going to cruise around where that saddle drops into deeper water. Right up along the shoreline here, you can see the changing color we talked about. You've got that shallow area, and then it falls away.
Well, it drops off, doesn't it?
And trout are going to cruise right along, just like on a river, that dark water or where the current seams meet. You can sort of view that as a current seam, where trout are going to cruise along those perimeters. They've got that proximity to deep water, so if they get spooked, they're gone, and yet they can make a little foray onto that shoal and pick off a scud, a leech, something like that.
We have a dam over there. This lake has a couple dams. Now,
Yes.
that's going to be deep right there, isn't it?
It's going to be deep, but you're also sometimes there is a little water movement out of some impoundments. They're going to be attracted to any kind of flowing water. You'll notice too, right on this point, we've got some weeds as well, and weed beds are just a fantastic structure. To me, they contain everything you need. There's food, there's protection from the trout. They can go through those weeds like you and I walk through the forest, and through photosynthesis, there's oxygen there that they can pick up for comfort.
So how would you start fishing this? Where would your battle plan? Where would you try your cast first?
Well, being as it's windy, you're going to try and get out of that a little bit. So I'm going to perhaps go up and try that saddle area. I'll have the wind at my back. the wind hasn't had a chance to sort of pick up momentum over the expanse of the lake. We can work those areas there. We can work some of that steep shoreline there where it falls in, because there's a trout will cruise just like in front here, and they quickly, the safety of deep waters nearby. You can also, almost the complete opposite, is come in and work this shoreline, because this shoreline is being worked over by wave action, which is going to disturb food sources out, and that wave action provides overhead cover for the trout, so they're going to be very comfortable coming in here and foraging.
A good place if you were in a float tube, so you had the wind behind you.
Exactly. Yeah,
or at a boat.
Yeah, I'd come in here and I'd anchor myself. Probably have to let out a little bit of rope to make sure I got a good purchase. I stay planted and work the fly, you know, cast within a foot of the bank and strip the fly out, let it sink a few seconds, strip it, fly out, and you're working that fly down the slope of that drop-off. Very effective technique.
You just mentioned that the cattle just moved up the road, and you said that was a good sign. What do you mean by that?
Well, we always joke that when the cows are feeding, I've got a good friend who's a guide in the Kamloops area, Gord Honey, and he often says that when he goes out for a day on the water with his clients, if he sees wildlife moving, he's pretty rest assured that the fish will be active and moving as well. It's funny, I always joke, I don't know how humans got to the top of the food chain. Maybe this opposable thumb is worth more than we realize, because all the rest of the animals seem far more in touch with their surroundings than we do some days.
I mean, they don't go to McDonald's?
Nope.
Well, let's go take a look at the other part of the lake, because you really want to assess the whole lake before you start to fish it.
Exactly. You want to have a quick look around, build yourself a game plan, and you follow logically along. We don't want to just sort of jump in the boat and let's go left.
All right, let's walk out and take a look at it.
Okay.
Well, now we've come to a good view of the lake, and if you can get a view like this and get up on a hill, not all lakes have hills like this, but we can really see the whole lake. Now, we came from over there for that little bay, and man, it opens up. There's all kinds of places.
Yeah, this lake, this vantage point is fantastic, because it just, all the clues are here, and I guess this would be a good argument for those that say lakes don't have any character. Come out and have a look at this. There is just features galore here for us to explore.
Well, let's define some lake terms like shoals and bars. I like bars myself the best.
Yeah, there are different kind of bars out here, but you're right, Jack. As with rivers and streams, there's riffles and runs. On lakes, if we start from the banks, we have the shoreline area, which generally is that area I'll call that extends out 1 to 4 feet deep. Then you have the shoal area. This is fly fishes where we're going to spend our most times, and that's let's say 5 to 20 feet deep, depending on suspended matter and sunlight. That's where you're going to get your maximum sunlight penetration, your weed growth. That's the larder of the lake. That's where all the feeding is going to take place, and that's where, as fly fishers, we're best suited to take advantage of those opportunities with the line choices and the fly patterns we choose. Then we go into the drop-off area, and that's, in general terms, any area that is a change in depth. Your classic drop-off is literally that. It's just like a cliff face. But drop-offs can be subtle. They can be almost step-like. Again, as you look around the lay of the land, you can see how above ground, how land changes its elevation, and the same goes on underneath the water. And then you have the deep water zone, and that, from a stillwater fly fishing perspective, I'm considering water 20 feet deep or greater, and that's not necessarily the easiest water for us to chart or to present flies to, but sometimes you've got to do it, and we do have methods that we can get on there.
On the drive down here, you had said you'd mapped this lake out, and you hadn't been here. How can you do that?
Well, on many lakes, what we're talking about with maps is actually bathymetric maps or underwater contour maps. And these are, you can get them off websites nowadays. There's books put out with them, and on select waters you can find out, and they just simply give you an idea of the underwater world, where the little humps are, where the little rises in the bottom contours are, where the drop-offs are, where the points are, how they extend. You'll see lines on these bathymetric maps. When the lines are close together, that means a steep or rapid change in depth, and when they're spread out, that's a more gradual change in depth, so that might be an indication of a shoal. And before you leave the driveway, you can mark out a little route map, a little game plan, at least when you get to the shores, and you're all swept up in the excitement of going fishing. You've got a game plan to follow and go along and guide your choices.
If you're going to pick 5 areas to fish, and that's about the time that we've got, which would you pick as the 5 best areas on this lake?
Well, if we look from right to left here, Jack, we've got 4 points of land out there that are very interesting. The land adjacent to those points is going to carry out. It's going to be shallow for a ways. There's lots of edges that trout can cruise along with depth change there. As we move towards the middle, we've got this little narrows in here, and you can see how the land tapers down and lays flat, and that's probably going to be quite shallow in there. Lots of weed growth, lots of good food sources, scuds, damsels, chironomids, all the major food groups are going to be inhabiting that area. Trout are going to go in there and feed. This crescent-shaped island is very interesting as well. You can see how the points, we can work both points there. We can also work where the wind is sweeping up against the edge of the island there, and you can see the color changes here, the changes in depth, and we're going to work those edges. Again, those trout are going to cruise those margins. Out in the middle of the main lake here is a really interesting structure, one I really like, and those are sunken islands.
Yeah, I saw those.
And
Definitely can tell that they're a lot shallower.
Yeah, you can see the color change there that we talked about, and again, we've got the trout's primary source of protection in the lake is deeper water, so they can cruise along the edges of that sunken island, make little forays over the top of it, and if anything unsettles them, they're off over the edge and gone. So they're going to like those areas. And then this dam looks interesting. From a wind perspective alone, we can get out of the wind a bit, but that steep drop, trout are going to be able to cruise very close to the shoreline. Looks like we've got some rocks in there that they can get in and forage and choose whatever food sources may be living amongst them. So some very interesting features. So those are the kind of the 5 key areas I'd start with today on this lake.
Well, and we're going to start first bank fishing.
Yes, we are.
And where do you think we want to start?
Let's try
the dam?
Yeah, let's try and get out of the wind a bit, and we can work our way back towards, but we've got some nice open rangeland here, so we don't have to worry about backcasts. Not all lakes offer this. Some of them are shrouded in trees, and it's just not possible, and that's where the boat comes in place. But we have the opportunity to fish from shore, so let's take advantage of it.
Well, here we are at the dam. It's deep. I can tell by just looking in the water, it just goes right off. Probably at least 10, 12 feet deep.
Yeah, it's ideal. You can see, again, we've come up here, the 8 of our Polaroids. We can quickly scan before we get too close, because it's not uncommon, especially in these windy conditions.
There goes a fish just swimming
fish,
right over there.
See fish cruising, so we don't want to come up here and spook them all away. But you're right, you can see
insects.
Yeah, and we've got little bait fish cruising along the shoreline here.
Look at that.
Little school of them.
Yep.
So a productive place. Trout are going to be very comfortable coming in here and foraging amongst the rocks and the weeds here, and if anything spooks them, as we saw, they quickly depart into deeper water and they'll come back.
Well, right now, you know the time of the year. You have a pretty good idea. Even though you've never been to this lake, you've fished Canada all your life. We're in the 3rd week of May. What should we expect? Wouldn't you have a pretty good idea what insects are going to be out there?
Yeah, this time of the year, Jack, obviously the most #1 hatch that we chase all season long are chironomids, so you're always going to want to fish those. This is prime habitat for damsels to emerge. They love crawling out on those long stem shoreline vegetation. Dragonflies are the same. Obviously we've seen minnows cruising along the banks here. Leeches are always prevalent, and scuds. So there's just a host of potential candidates we can imitate.
Can I ask you a question here?
You sure can.
In a few minutes, would you take us through the insects that you should look at it and thing? But right now I want to go fishing and start techniques, but
yeah,
you'll take us through the insects and what to look for?
It's critical to know what the fish like to feed on in still waters.
Well, right now we have a great opportunity here at this lake. We know from what the guide Brent, oh, look at that.
Look
right
at that.
There was a fish, 2 fish. Look at that. Oh,
look at
3
that.
fish.
Look,
4 fish.
They're sipping up on the surface, Jack. Something, and with this wind, it's quite possible we could have some terrestrial action. Not the most common encounter on a lake, but again, these grassy grasslands, prime ants, termites, grasshoppers, and just
beetles.
You name it, anything that ends up on the water, they're opportunistic.
Oh, boy, they're going crazy.
Yeah.
And again.
Another one.
Look at that, and again. Okay, enough of this.
Enough talking, let's go
Okay, now we've got 2 setups.
Yes, we do.
We talked about this earlier. I have a clear intermediate, and I have a leech and a scud. And the other rod with your indicator, I've got chironomids. And what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking neither of us should do the same thing when we're trying to discover what they're taking. Why don't you start with the intermediate line?
Sure.
It's a great way to cover water and find active fish. And once we catch that fish, we have methods. We can do a throat analysis and see
need
what
to
they're
do
on.
that.
And I'll go with the chironomid technique here and give something from the other end of the spectrum, something very slow and static. Maybe they're in the mood to chase their food today, and maybe they're not.
Well, we want to catch a fish. I mean, the object now is catch a fish to see what you can learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to try to catch a whole bunch of fish. We want to catch one fish and work some magic, right?
Yeah, once that's done, everything else is gravy.
Well, let's go to it.
All right then.
I'm going to go put this dry rod down. Oh, boy. Holy cow. How big do you say that fish?
That's at least 8 pounds.
At least 8 pounds. That's what I like about lakes. I like about lakes. All right, let's get going.
Okay,
Phil, are you ready?
I'm ready. I've seen enough.
The games begin. He's going to be basically casting out and letting the float do the work. Phil, can you tell us a little bit about that as you do that?
Yeah, what I've done, Jack, is I've got a chironomid set up here. I've got two chironomids set at about 6 feet from the bottom chironomid down to from the indicator. And I'm just letting this wind, I've got a nice drift that I can, it's almost like fishing a river. I'm just allowing that to sweep through the area, keeping a keen eye on that indicator, and I'm trying to position the fly to just where I see the drop-off start, because that's where we've seen fish come in, cruise up against the rocks, and then head back out. And it's a great way to cover water with a near static presentation. It's just drifting along.
The only bad thing about fishing from the shore, Phil, is your fly line's on the ground.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get closer and then adopt a low profile, so if one of those cruisers comes in, perhaps he won't see me.
Okay. The typical situation for presenting chironomid pupil patterns under an indicator is we're in our anchored boat or fishing craft. We cast downwind. You don't have to cast 90 feet, it can only be 30 feet. Remember, you have to be able to see that indicator go down, and sometimes it doesn't go boink and disappear. Sometimes it just quivers, or sometimes it just goes down 1/4 of an inch and pops back up. So you have to be able to see the indicator. That's the typical situation. There could be all kinds of fish swimming right under our boats, but we can't see them. So you can often catch fish 10 feet from the boat. Another excellent situation to use a strike indicator with the chironomid pupil patterns is when we get a gentle breeze on the water. Just a nice little riffle. It's a fisherman's riffle. You cast out or quarter a cast out to the side of your boat, let a belly form in your line, a gentle belly, and let the wind push your indicator downwind. That indicator is bobbing up and down, which means our chironomid pupil pattern is up and down. It's wiggling like this up and down, which they do naturally. Use that in combination with a non-slip loop knot or a Duncan loop knot, and you've got an effective, very subtle way of presenting a real chironomid pupil pattern.
What do you think on retrieves, Phil, from the shore here? Since, you know, I haven't fished for a Canadian lake trout in a long time.
Well, you can start with that leech. You can you know, start with something active, maybe a strip retrieve consisting of 4 to 6 inch pulls. You put some pauses in there, and that really makes that leech pattern pitch and dive in the water, gets that marabou on that pattern moving. If that doesn't work, you can slow the retrieve down, longer, slower strips, or perhaps a hand twist retrieve and just bring it along slow and steady. But it's good to vary the pace, as nothing in Mother Nature seems to move straight and level. They're always random in their motions.
Most of the time when I'm teaching seminars, I tell people you don't really have to cast very far, that most trout are caught between about 25 and 35 feet. And that's true even on lakes. But we do like a long cast, and you should practice on trying to cast long. And these new fly lines with the weight forward and some of the shooting heads will help you do that. But the reason is so we get to cover more water. The longer the cast, the more water we cover. And many times these fish will follow all the way up almost to your rod tip at times before they take the fly. Now notice that my rod tip is down. Don't you think the rod tip is so important to have down?
It's critical, Jack. You have to keep a straight contact with your fly, because many of the takes we experience on lakes are so subtle and soft that if there's any kind of, if your rod tip's up in the air like this, the fish can grab your fly, move away with it, and you'll never know it was there.
Well, I'll tell you, my experience, sometimes the line just goes tight and they're on.
Exactly. It almost feels like you've snagged bottom and all of a sudden bottom starts to move.
Yeah. You know what I like too about lake fishing is I like the solitude.
Yeah, you can get away. It's not hard to, even on a crowded body of water, to find your own little quiet place of peace and sanctuary.
I like the retrieves to move the fly, then stop it, let it sink a little bit, move it up some more.
Yeah, because the trout can be attracted to that motion, and then it stops and starts to dive away, and that's almost like a flea response, and the trout is an instinctive feeder. You know, it's just a matter of getting the right stimulus to get them to eat.
Oh, I just had a bump.
Oh, good.
Notice that I didn't bring that rod straight up. He just bumped it.
Yeah, with that leech pattern, though, don't be surprised if you get a real arm-wrenching strike as well. That's a big prey item for them, and they'll expend the calories to eat something like that.
Well, I had a bump. That's a good sign. I saw the size of that fish, though. That was not good. Okay, I'm letting it sink down. I haven't got any moss yet, so I'm really not on the bottom.
You're right, Jack. Just like fishing rivers and streams, to be effective fly fishing still waters, you need to be bouncing the bottom once in a while. So that means consistently placing your fly within 1 to 3 feet of the bottom. That's where all the weed growth and bottom debris is, that's home to all the food organisms trout prey upon. That's where lunch is served. That's where they're most likely going to be prowling. So you need to choose the right line and presentation technique to get your fly in that zone. What I'm doing here, Jack, is just technique known as wind drifting. It's almost like fishing a river. You can see I'm throwing little mends, and I'm just watching that indicator and allowing that fly to sweep through the water column. I'm fishing 2 chironomid pupa here, 2 varying sizes and colors to cover all my options, and I'm just allowing the wind to sweep that fly through the water column. Very, very slow retrieve. I'm just taking contact. I'm not even really pulling on the fly at all. If you like, you can give the fly the odd sort of 6 to 12 inch pull, make that indicator move. What that does is pitches those chironomids up, and as you release your retrieve, they kind of flutter back down again, and it does a great job of suggesting the rise, fall motion of an emerging chironomid pupa.
They're still rising, Phil. You need to get them.
I know.
You know what we left? All our flies in the boat.
Yeah, I think we could use some
lunches.
Some of those crazy rubber leg patterns of yours that might...
Well, I'm going to run back and get the boat while you teach our friends some of the other techniques from the shore.
I'd be happy to, Jack.
How's that?
Hurry back.
Don't worry, I'll hurry back with the lunch and the flies. But you know, the old story though, I got to do this. I got to do one more cast. Look at that, keep rising all over the place. What do you think they're rising for?
Well, there could be a number of candidates. First of all, we do see the odd chironomid flying around, so it could be egg-laying females or pupa as they're right in the moment of transition, emergers and adults. And also we've got the grasslands behind us and to our left here, and basically all around us. There's all kinds of insects, terrestrials that could be swept onto the water, ants, beetles, even potentially hoppers. It's been unusually warm so far this year.
You know what I think we need to do? We ought to ask Brian what he thinks.
Yeah, I'd certainly take any advice I could get.
Let's go to Brian.
Well, we've all been in that situation, guys, and I think you want to watch closely at what the other angler is doing in terms of, in that situation, you're fishing strike indicators, so it could be depth. It could be a difference of 6 inches in depth. He was 6 inches higher or lower than what you two were fishing, and that can make all the difference in the world.
And again, we're still wind drifting the fly, but we can also do some things here to this method or any presentation technique, and that's simply by adding some retrieves. And we can start with the simple hand twist retrieve, where once the cast is made, the rod tip's pointed down at the surface. I place the I prefer personally to place that line between the thumb and forefinger of my right hand in this case, because I'm a right-handed caster. Just feel you get a better sensitivity, and I'm just going to slowly bring the fly in and choose a pace that matches the food source you're imitating. So for chironomids, it's going to be extremely slow. If I was perhaps imitating a damsel, I might be a little faster. I could be a scud, I could go fast for a second, pause, strip, fast, pull, and mix and match this to imitate whatever food source you've got on the end of your line. The other method we can do as well is simply place the line under the forefinger and just strip it. We can do long, slow pulls. Place the pause in there and see if we have any response. We can do what I call the 4 to 6 inch pulls, or we can do short, choppy variations, or even for chironomids, if you struggle with the hand twist, is just pinch the line, just like this. I'm moving it in about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and I'm just pinching it along ever so slowly like this. This retrieve for chironomids takes a bit of discipline because it's quite common and easy to go a little faster, and pretty soon you've got a warp speed chironomid, which is not too effective. So you want to keep things, most retrieves in still waters that I can think of, it's better to err on the side of slow and methodical with pauses here and there than anything fast and steady. So again, those are the retrieves you got to do, because in still waters your hands do all the movement of the fly. You don't have any current per se like you do in a river or stream anyway to move the fly through the water column or help get that fly to come to life.
Hey Phil, I'm going to get rigged up so we go out on the lake and show folks fishing from a boat. Why don't you take them through some of the insects they can find on lakes?
Be happy to, Jack. Before you ever head out on any still water, whether it's a strange one like this or an old favorite, it's always a good idea to go walking around the shoreline and find out what could be on the menu for that day. Great tool to help you with this is your good old aquarium net. You can simply take it and sweep it through the water like so, through the weeds, and you'll be amazed on many of the productive lakes in North America just what you'll find. Look at this right here. Here we've got a bit of a surprise. Our net sampling revealed a brook stickleback. We've seen clouds of minnows swimming along the edges of the shoreline here, obviously hugging close to the bank because they've been picked on a few times, I imagine, by big trout. Looking at this brook stickle, this gives us a good measure of the size, the shape, the coloration, and when we let it go, we'll get an idea of its behavior, how it moves through the water, and then we can choose the appropriate fly pattern and presentation technique to match it. Okay, now I'm going to let it go and see how it darts away. There he goes. And you can see he just scoots around the bottom, kind of random in nature, lots of stops and starts, so that's how I might want to imitate that. Also in the net, we have a freshwater shrimp, or more appropriately called scud, and this is from the Gammarus family, the larger family of scuds. There's two families, Hyalella and Gammarus, and Gammarus require lakes rich in calcium to develop their chitinous exoskeleton, and these are a true staple. They never hatch or emerge into anything. They begin their life as a scud and they end their life as a scud. They go through many molts, they're very productive, they're very prolific, and they're probably one of the big reasons these trout in this lake get so big and fat. And again, we can look at its size, shape, color, and behavior, and choose a fly to match. You can see almost a pearlescent iridescence. Okay, and now we'll just let him go and make a mental note of how he likes to swim. And there he goes, all over the place like he's drunk. Here's another food source that many river and stream anglers would be familiar with, caddis. And in still waters, all of your caddis are cased caddis. This guy's tucked inside his reed home, and he'll crawl around the bottom, feeding on vegetation or other animal matter. Some species of caddis in still waters are entirely predaceous, so they'll feed on small scuds, chironomid larvae, anything that they can tackle. When it's time to getting close to emergence, they'll seal themselves off in their home, where they'll transform into the pupal state. When their transformation is complete, they'll cut their way free and start They'll stage for a little while on the bottom, depending on species, and then they'll use their long, elongated hind legs and in oar-like fashion scull their way up to the surface, where they'll either emerge at the surface, or some species are actually capable of swimming towards shore and crawling out onto dry land to emerge. And you can see this guy's kind of coming out of his shell, so to speak, and to start crawling around. In addition to using the aquarium net, this shoreline is a great example of a place to look with all these rocks. Many of the insects remain hidden throughout the brighter parts of the day and through a lot of their life to avoid predation. So we can also turn over rocks and logs such as we have here and see what's potentially living underneath of these. So we'll start with the closest one. And you can see here we've got some freshwater shrimp or scuds. Okay, so we'll put that rock away and turn over another one. And usually the smaller rocks, about hand sized, are easier to do this for because you can pick them up in one smooth motion and see what's living under there. The net is always better because so many food sources, as soon as you turn over the rocks, are very agile and are soon to scurry away. We're seeing lots of freshwater shrimp in here, and I've also seen, when we turn over the rocks, a few other bait fish as well. And in addition to the brook stickle, there was some fathead minnows in here, and I also saw what appeared to be dace as they darted away. There's also water boatmen that are scurrying around here. They tend to be seasonal in importance, but here in Alberta they're a very important insect and a very exciting hatch, if you will, to fish, although they're not really a hatch. But these insects are related to the beetles. They have oar-like legs and they scull themselves through the water. They become mature in the late fall, where they'll fly off, disperse and migrate and mate, and they'll also be active again in the early spring, and the trout will come up and really slam these on the surface because they fly out of the water, and when they're fully mature they can only fly at that point, and then they'll come back down crash into the water surface, kind of knock themselves half senseless, scurry around, and then dart back down to the bottom. This activity obviously draws a lot of interest from the trout. Other things you can expect to find around shorelines are damselfly nymphs, dragonfly nymphs, and on muddier shorelines or under some rocks you'll even find leeches as well. It pays to be observant. Use your eyes, observe what you see, pick the most prominent food source and begin by matching that. Observe its size, shape, color, and behavior, and you should do just fine imitating a variety of food sources on Stillwater.
Damselfly nymphs live in the vegetation that grows off the bottom and up off the bottom along the shoal or littoral zones of the lake. They feed on shrimp, zooplankton, mayfly nymphs, things like that. So the trout are going to come into that shallower water, 20 feet and less, to feed on those nymphs as they're immature. When the damselfly nymph is fully developed, and this is usually late spring, early summer, the nymphs will swim off the bottom of the lake up to within 2 or 3 feet of the lake surface. Then they'll swim horizontally until they reach some long stem bulrush or cattails. The nymphs will crawl up the stems of those plants and they'll emerge as the adult damselfly. It's during that emergent swim that the trout really get aggressive and hunt down those insects. And it makes sense because when there's an emergence, there's lots of them in the water column, and that's what keys the fish to feed on them. Similarly, dragonfly nymphs live in the same habitat in the vegetation at the bottom of the lake as the damselfly nymphs. Dragonfly nymphs can live for up to 5 years in the nymphal stage, and they're the top predator of the insect world down below. They're feeding on anything smaller than themselves, including damselfly nymphs. When a dragonfly nymph is fully developed, and this is usually happens after the damselfly nymphs in terms of timing in the summer months, the nymphs will crawl along the bottom of the lake and up out of the lake. So they crawl and swim or scoot along the bottom and then out of the water, right onto the shore of the lake, and then they climb up some emergent vegetation such as bulrush or pine trees or alder trees that are inside the lake. A split forms in the back of the thorax of that dragonfly nymph, and the adult crawls out, fills its wings with fluid, and eventually flies away. So when dragonfly nymphs are emerging, there's lots of them, and again, that's what keys the interest of the trout. There's hundreds and hundreds or thousands of these dragonfly nymphs crawling along the bottom of the lake and out of the water. And again, it's a great food source. They're available year-round as nymphs, just like the damselflies, but both for damsels and dragonflies, the most intense feeding is during their migration crawls or swims to emerge into the adult phase. Well, Jack and Phil, this is my suggestion on that situation. I'd give those fish, or present those fish, something bug ugly. Big, ugly, something they've never seen before, like a Chernobyl ant, and let that splash on the water with a splat, and then strip it in, basically hop it in, and see if you can get one of those big aggressive fish to have a look at it.
Well, what we've done here is we've been observing, after sampling along the water, during that process we found an awful lot of fish rising to some unknown food source on the surface. And as you saw when we were looking in the weeds, I think that's probably terrestrial. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to give them play the little greed card. If some of those terrestrials we saw were size, say 12 down to 14 or 16, depending on whether it was a beetle or an ant, we're going to give them something big and bushy and garish. Brian recommended this tip to me, so I'll thank Brian for that. And just to keep things honest, I've got a small chironomid pupa hanging off. It's kind of a Stillwater hopper dropper technique. So let's go give it a whirl.
Got a fish.
Oh boy, well done.
Whoa, he's taking me to the backing.
Oh, he's angry.
Whoa, that's what I like about lake fishing. They're usually not very small. All right, I saw fish cruising this at about 10 feet off the bank. And I got out here in the boat. Whoa, look at that fish go for the deep water.
Yeah, and
making him earn it though.
And that's to be expected. That's where that's where he believes sanctuary to be.
I had 2 hits right at the first cast, went right back. He bumped it 2 times. I didn't set on him, Phil. Yeah. It's really important.
Yes.
I let him hit 3 times before he took it.
Yeah, it's
and I strip striked him and I got him. Nice fat fish. Look at this.
Where do you want to land this, Jack?
Let's go right over here.
Okay, let me come around.
Whoa, it's a nice fish.
No, he's not quite ready yet.
You know,
look at the sides on that thing.
All right, stay right there. I can move him over there.
Yeah, if you can swing him in here, it's perfect.
He doesn't want to go. Okay, Phil.
Well, if you can.
Here, get ready. He's coming to the surface. Yeah. I feel him ready. I'm getting low.
And I'm staying low too, because this is where you're going to lose most of your fish. You'll spook them.
Okay, his head's up.
Yeah, whoops.
Nope, head was up.
That is a monster rainbow, Jack.
Okay, here he goes. We got him going the right way.
Oh!
Oh boy.
Not sure if that net will hold.
I guess this would qualify from the bank. I cheated a little bit.
Throw that away so we don't hook ourselves.
Phil, I want to point out to all our viewers here how important observation is. Twice while we're eating lunch, I saw fish come by here. The minnows were here. I know the leeches are here. I just wanted to get here and cast. Only it was 3 casts. Yep. Right up here. Second cast had bumps. Third cast went right back up to the same place. Bumped it. He was following it, testing me. And all I did was just pull back on that line and he ran with it. Raised my rod, we had a fish.
Yeah, they'll come up behind and they'll just, it
was a soft take.
Yeah, he just closes his mouth around it.
But if I would have sat and pulled that rod back, I wouldn't have had the chance to do this.
Well, Jack, this big fish is giving us a noble battle. And again, the beauty of this wooden landing net is I can actually let it go. And whoa! Sorry, fish.
Fish wrestling.
Fish wrestling. Greco-Roman fish wrestling. There we go.
Beautiful. That's what you get on lakes.
That is a Stillwater rainbow.
That'll make you into a lake fisherman.
And we want to take our time with this. We'll just hold him under his belly, observe his gills. We can move him back and forth a little bit. I usually try to let him try and swim away a couple of times. I'm not sure I can hold this brute if he tries to go. But this fish takes a lot of lactic acid buildup. Takes a little while to get his strength
You
back.
don't have the moving water and the oxidization that you have in a stream, so you've got to really
Take your time.
And I think that's important to really remember to try to land these fish as fast as you can.
Yeah, so you try and get away with as heavy a tippet as possible. And today's modern monofilaments and fluorocarbons are just excellent for that. You can get away with.
This is a perfect time to talk about that. What do you prefer for lake fishing?
Well, if you look at it from a pound breaking strain perspective, I like to go as heavy as I can. I think we've been using 7 and actual 9 pounds of breaking strain because we know there's some real monsters in here. But I would probably start for most average trout fishing with the 3X, 4X tippets and go up. But try to get away with as heavy a tippet as you can so you can fight fish quickly and release them quickly.
Well, I want to thank you for bringing me to Alberta. That was worth coming all the way here for.
It's not bad, is it?
No, I don't think I could catch a rainbow at home like this on the Snake River or the New Fork or any of the other rivers.
No, that one's a healthy, well-fed fish, well-conditioned fish.
Well, thanks, Phil, to talk about leaders. I always felt that fluorocarbon really was made for lakes.
It really is, Jack. It gives you the stealth that you need with the clear water conditions you often face and great breaking strain. So you can get away with those higher strength tippet and leaders, and you can able to fight fish hard and fast and get them in quickly and release them and hopefully get into a few more others.
Well, I think it's time maybe we got one from the bank. Let's go and investigate this lake with a boat. We can cover a lot more territory.
Yeah, we can go try a number of our options, that weed bed we talked about, those points, and that sunken island as well, because the wind's laying down a bit and we can get out and be more versatile with our choices.
Well, let's gather up our stuff and get going.
All right.
We want to investigate the lake because we want to come back here. And if we only fish one spot that we're catching fish, we're not going to learn the lake, are we?
No, and it's a good idea, as tough on the discipline it may be sometimes after catching a fish of that magnitude, to say, okay, let's go move somewhere else and explore that. So by the end of the day or the end of your time on the water, you've got a good basis for coming back for future visits or figuring out other lakes as well, because the lessons you learn on this lake are easily transferable to other still waters.
You mentioned we could drift these weed beds and pick up fish this time of the day, because we're into mid-afternoon. We got all the way till dark.
You bet.
And it's a good time. Is there a reason because of insects moving into the weeds? Or
we noticed in our shore sampling lots of potential food sources. It's the home base for many of those prey items. We've also seen that constant parade of minnows right along the edges, and the trout will come in and herd them up, come out of the depths, hopefully pick off a few stragglers and then move back out. So they're constantly moving in and out of these weed edges, and with the wind here we get a bit of a break so we can present our flies in the manner we want to present them, not the way Mother Nature's trying to dictate to us. And as you mentioned, with the double anchoring system, we can look for the inside corners like the one we've been fishing here off the shore, and we can fish one direction. One angler can fish downwind, the other one can fish crosswind, and again we can cover as much water as we can with a variety of different techniques.
we're going to try a variety of techniques to teach our folks what you know, and hopefully we can be successful. And I know that right now, along these weeds, we got our first good fish.
And it's a sound strategy to carry on that and just explore different areas of the lake using the same methodology and kind of build and grow our knowledge base of this lake and its habits for future visits and future visits to other still waters.
So let's go. I mean, this talk is not getting us anywhere.
No, let's go wet some lines and drown some flies and hopefully get some arm exercise.
Fire up the electric motor. I know that my experience with fishing lakes, Phil, is that most people that have never fished a lake before can't understand why the fish just aren't right there. And they move around.
Yes, they're constantly on the prowl. Now they will, depending on the times of the season, they will cruise certain areas and hang out in certain areas. Early in the year when the water temperatures are cool and the oxygen content is good. One of the things to remember is water temperature increases, its ability to hold oxygen decreases. So that's going to have an effect on where trout are going to be. So you may find trout in the spring in the shallow reaches of the lake, and by midsummer it's just simply too warm for them to be there. You're going to have to move into deeper areas in that 15, 20 foot, or perhaps even deeper, depending on the particular conditions of the lake.
There's no question that you have to be in the zone. Our friend Denny Rickards, that's his teaching. You have to be in the zone. Obviously, if you're not, the fish feed in the zones. And, you know, I'm sure that you can always pick up some fish with a sinking line right on the bottom with a lot of patience. But that isn't a lot of fun, is it?
Not usually, and for the most part, we like to focus our efforts in that water less than 20 feet deep. Again, that's where your food sources are going to be most prevalent, and this is where we have the widest range of presentation options. We can use floating lines, intermediate lines, clear intermediates, slow sinking lines. We can do a variety of different presentation techniques to take advantage of that prime water that we're best suited for.
You know, I think when it comes to lake fishing, you can't get enough education. And to read books by you and Brian Chan and Denny Rickards, make sure you get as many of the DVD teaching videos that are out there, because there's so much to learn here that not one person knows it all.
No, you never stop learning, Jack. That's a motto on my own website, because you never stop learning.
That's the first rise I've seen.
Yep, and that's, again, upwind and just off. We can see the shade here.
Yep.
You can see that that's just on the deep water. So we want to work our flies. We can cast them out to the deep and let the wind-induced current sweep them down a bit, and then bring them back up and hopefully run into another big rainbow.
Now, I fished a lot in Europe, and they do this a lot in a boat with no motor. They drift with the wind.
Yes, they have a different approach. In fact, a number of Stillwaters I follow. Being an ardent Stillwater fly fisher, I pay close attention to the European scene. I've learned a lot from the methods and techniques that they've done, and been able to successfully adapt them to North America. And many of the Stillwaters there, it's not part of the rules to anchor, whereas here, sometimes amongst a sea of anchored boats, you might get frowned upon if you drift through them all.
Right.
So it's kind of a different way of looking at the problem. But they use big underwater parachutes called drogues, and they'll tie them off to the center of the boat, and it just controls the drift of the boat and keeps the boat centered. It's a little bit of positioning, and they just work the flies, and the boat basically drifts them over. I've done it myself on some occasions. It's a great way to cover water over a big, vast shoal of fairly consistent depth. You can work a variety of methods. They believe firmly that, that your flies are always being shown to new fish. So if you're anchored in one area, there's a good chance that fish will see your fly a couple of times. You don't even know about it, not be happy with your presentation or your fly pattern choice, and you're just not having a good day.
It's called lock style, and they do it in the World Fly Fishing Championships. And it's a hard technique, and you can't fish upstream. You have to cast upstream, but downwind.
Downwind, and they just slowly retrieve the fly line for the most part. They do vary the retrieves, of course, but they just stay in contact with those flies. North American Stillwater fly fishing seems to be more favored around either trolling around using fins or paddles in a pontoon boat or a belly boat, or as we prefer to do, and a lot of times in our aluminum prams, is just anchor and work the fly, and just vary our, pick a likely looking spot that's a good area that a fish might patrol, and just work our different presentation techniques and fly patterns until we find success.
Would you still look at chironomids here?
I would for the most part, but I'm still not seeing a lot of shucks on the surface, and your observation doesn't stop once you leave the shore. I always say your head is constantly on a swivel. You're looking as you have looked. You've noticed rising fish, so that gives a clue that we're in a likely looking area. We're looking for organisms on the water. We're looking for shucks of emerging insects such as chironomids, and we're just not seeing a lot here. There's a few, there's one drifting by there now, but not a lot of activity. This wind is going to affect it. You also want to learn to look with your Polaroids through the water and see what's underneath the surface. And you can see leeches swimming by from time to time, damselflies migrating by, or schools of minnows, or even a big rainbow cruising by. So your powers of observation are key, both on the shore and especially on the water.
My experience with coaching the U.S. fly fishing team in Europe, watching the other countries fish lakes, they'd laugh at us using 2 flies here. Why are you using that few of flies?
Yeah, it's funny, and in Alberta, we can use 3 flies here. In your home state of Wyoming, what's the regulations there?
I think 5 maybe. Three is pretty common in the U.S., but in Europe, in England, you can use 5.
And in British Columbia, as we talked about, 1 fly only per rod. So different regulations cause you to use different techniques, but if you can use droppers, I strongly encourage you to give it a try. Not only can you eliminate different potential food choices. For instance, I've got a leech pattern on my intermediate line right now with a bead-headed scud pattern, and I'm also offering a variety of size. The leech is fairly large. It's a number 6 leech, and my scud pattern's a number 12. So I've got a disparity in size there that we can see which is working better. And we're also covering different water depths as well. So we have the opportunity, as you alluded to, that depth is so critical, that our flies can cover 2 different zones during our retrieve, and we can hopefully find fish that way. Plus, it's always exciting, never knowing which one they grabbed.
I've got a question I'm going to have for Brian that I'll ask you. We'll get 2 different answers. I've been on lakes, especially lakes, where guys have been just like side by side, using the same flies, same almost identical techniques. One guy's catching fish and the other guy's not. And it happens more on lakes. What's your answer to that? Why does that happen?
And it's happened, it's happened to me personally, and I've had those days where nothing can go wrong, and I've had those days that, man, I couldn't buy a fish if I was standing in a supermarket. I recall one time I was doing a chironomid class, and I had a student in the boat with me, much the same as yourself, and I gave him in fact, I gave him the fly I was using and cast it out into the spot I was casting, and he still didn't get a fish. So I changed over to the fly he had, and I took a fish. So I actually had him cast his indicator within 3 inches of mine, and they're both sitting there, and mine went down. Exactly the same technique. Sometimes I think it's just attention to detail. The successful angler is perhaps doing something, a little variation in the retrieve. It could be their flies just over slightly different water. It's sinking at a slightly different rate. Their leader may be longer, shorter, lots of little variables. I usually start by really getting micro and really examining what line, what leader, what retrieve, what fly, how's he tying it on. You know, does it have good movement? Is he using a loop knot, which we use a lot in Stillwaters to make that fly move? And just try to eliminate and find out. And then there's always good old Mother Nature and good old luck itself.
I was waiting to see if you'd get to that.
We also have to consider the situation where one angler just happens to anchor on the pot of gold, and those fish are just swimming around 30 feet behind his boat for some reason. It could be something biological, like there's a spring there, but more often than not, there's a bit of luck involved, because like any other activity, fishing involves a bit of good luck.
Now we're taking a break. What are the 3 factors that help you find fish in a lake?
Well, the 3 factors I use, Jack, to eliminate non-productive water in the same manner a river or stream fisherman does, and that's comfort, protection, and food. Comfort are those factors such as barometric pressure, water temperature, understanding the seasons of the lake and where fish are going to be distributed throughout the season. Protection are those things that are going to give trout the sense of security and the willingness to feed. So we've got wind riffled surface, algae, adjacency to depth, structure, those kind of things. And food, which is what we as fly fishers are all about, imitating the food sources that they prey upon. So an understanding of the different food sources, not necessarily a degree in aquatic entomology, but certainly an understanding of the different food sources, how they move, when they're most likely to occur, how their emergence process takes place, and where they're about to be found along the weed beds and the shallow areas of the lake that receive the sunshine that helps grow the weeds through photosynthesis.
This looks like a pretty good place. This kind of meets a lot of criteria.
It does. It's got a fishy look to it. We've got that nice weed bed, that gradual slope into deep water, so trout can prowl along the edges here and dart in and pick off targets of opportunity. And the protection here as well, because you can see the wind rippled surface here. We've already seen a few fish cruising along here.
Look at all the vegetation through there.
Yeah, perfect hiding places for a wide variety of food items, from scuds to minnows, baitfish, all kinds of things.
See, Brian is repositioning himself, bringing up the anchor. Doesn't like it's coming up easy.
Nope. A lot of these muddy bottoms, that anchor vacuums in, but you need to have that. It's better to be well anchored than be frustrated at constantly being swept and drift and bounced along the bottom.
You mentioned barometric pressure. I mean, lakes can be very productive when you have bad weather, but you usually have to go deep, don't you?
Yeah, it's the change. It's as a storm approaches. I don't think anybody's able to put the definitive exact answer, but it definitely has an effect, and fish will definitely go off the bite. And it's been my experience and experiences such as Brian that fish are going to slow down their activity. They're going to be less inclined to feed, and they're even going to move off into the security of deeper water where they'll find refuge and give themselves time to adjust to the changes that they're experiencing. They're very sensitive creatures to their environment.
Barometric pressure is one of those discussion points that there's many diverse opinions on how it affects fish and their activity levels. I think it's safe to say that when you have stable or rising barometer, that means the weather is going to be stable. And if you look at animals in general, like wildlife, they're much more active when the barometric pressure is stable or rising. Similarly, in the aquatic environment, when you have a stable or rising barometer, things are pretty good. Insects are hatching and fish are generally happy. What happens when the barometric pressure declines rapidly? That it tells us that there's a storm coming in, and there could be some issues with barometric pressure affecting subsurface or aquatic insect and fish life. I guess it's safe to say that when the barometer is falling or crashing, oftentimes the fishing is poor. And again, there's many variables why that's happening, but that's pretty well a statement of fact and something we have to live with as anglers. Water temperature is a key environmental factor that any fly fisher needs to understand. Water temperature dictates oxygen levels in the water. The cooler the water, the more oxygen it's going to support. Also, water temperature dictates when insects emerge. It's all based on water temperature. And so a good temperature for most situations to consider is that if the surface temperature of a lake is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you know the water's warm enough for major insect emergencies to occur. Conversely, in the mid or warm parts of the summer, when the surface temperatures of the lake reach in excess of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you know that their fish are going to be uncomfortable because there's going to be a lot less oxygen in the water. And those warm days when the water gets that warm, that's when the angler really has to consider, if you're fishing and you're catching fish, you want to play them quickly, get them into the net, release them as soon as you can, because you don't want to put them into any more stress than they already are in when trying to live or survive in that warmer water. Lakes go through 4 seasons, just like we go through on Earth. No, start over. Lakes go through seasonal changes: spring, summer, fall, and winter. This is really critical information for the stillwater fly fisher to understand, because the different seasons of the lake dictate where the trout can live in different parts of the lake. So let's take a quick look at what happens in a lake at different times of the year. Let's start in the middle of winter. In a lot of north temperate lakes in North America, small lakes freeze over. So there's a covering ice for 3 to 5 months of the year. There's things that happen under the ice that determine where fish can live. And one of the biggest factors we need to consider is that in many of these productive still waters, prior to freeze up, there's been a lot of aquatic plant growth. When a lake is covered with ice and snow, those plants can no longer photosynthesize, so they die off and they start decomposing. The decomposition process of all that vegetation gobbles up oxygen during the winter months. And so in many, many situations, there's not a lot of oxygen in a lake during the winter months. So now we've got a lake it's this deep, it's got a layer of ice on it, and we've got some oxygen below the ice, but close to the bottom, the oxygen is gradually decreasing as the winter months progress. The day the ice comes off a lake, there's this much oxygenated water, and then below there is very poorly oxygenated water, and in some situations not enough oxygen to support fish life. So now we have the ice off the lake, we have a band of oxygenated water, and then we have the rest of the volume of the lake with less oxygen. We have a situation in the spring that's called spring turnover that these small lakes go through. And what this means is that as the surface layers of the water warm up so that they're the similar temperature as the bottom layers, the surface waters will sink or mix. You add a bit of wind and you get what we call a spring turnover, where the entire water column mixes. The surface waters are pushed down to the bottom waters come up to the surface. A lake that was previously very clear, when it turns over, will get quite murky. You'll see a lot of detritus or decayed composition matter floating in the water column, and it'll be dirty. That's a spring turnover. The thing you have to remember about a spring turnover is that we still have that layer of oxygenated water now mixing with the entire water column. And at turnover, the entire water column has a reduced amount of oxygen throughout it. And that can be stressful for the fish, and that's why fishing at turnover, when a lake is in turn, will not be very good. Within 5 to 10 days after a turnover event, the water will clear up. It will continue to mix, but now there's lots of oxygenated water. The fish are happy, and also the completion of spring turnover also coincides with warmer water temperatures and the observation or the start of the first insect hatches of the year, which are the midges or chironomids. So we've gotten through the spring turnover. We're well into spring. We've got lots of insect hatches occurring. We now enter the summer period where we have some warm air temperatures. Lakes will stratify in the summertime. That means the upper layers of the water will get warm. The lower depths will not warm up. That's because the sun's energy can only penetrate to a certain depth in the water column. We also get algae blooms on a lot of lakes, blue-green algae blooms, and they photosynthesize during the day and they respire at night. So during the day, all these little green dots of algae, or they look like grass clippings in the water, they're photosynthesizing and putting oxygen in the lake. But unfortunately at night, they respire and they strip oxygen out of the water. So you might have heard the term of summer kill, and that's typically what happens when you have a summer kill, is that you have a massive blue-green algae bloom on the lake. At night they respire, and those fish that are in the shallow portions of the lake get trapped, and they get trapped in water that is rapidly losing its oxygen, and they die. They get disorientated and they die. In the standard scenario, we'll have a blue-green algae bloom. It dissipates in the fall, because in the fall we have less sunlight, water's cooling down, the blue-greens die off because they're not getting enough sunlight, water temperatures are cooling down. We get to a point where the surface temperatures now cool down to where they're as cold as the lower depths of the lake, and we'll get another turnover, and that's called fall turnover. The lake will get dirty again. It'll clear up 5 to 10 days later, and it's from that fall to the completion of fall turnover till freeze up is when you have some of the best fishing of the year, because the water temperatures are cooling, the entire water column is saturated with oxygen, and those big fish will come into that shallow water again to feed heavily prior to winter. They want to put on as much body fat as they can, because remember, trout are cold-blooded, and when a lake is covered with ice and we have cool winter temperatures, they become very lethargic, or they use minimal amounts of energy to search out food. So they want to feed aggressively prior to the winter period coming and the ice cover. So that completes the complete annual cycle of a lake. It's definitely a subject worth exploring more in detail, and that means reading some books to get more information so that you fully understand what's occurring on your favorite still water. So Jack and Phil, if I came upon the situation where we had great big chironomid bombers laying eggs, that means the female's dipping the tip of her abdomen in the surface film, it's flat calm out, you see the V wake, those fish are gulping, they're coming up, they're just showing the tops of their heads and they're sipping them down. Ideally, we'd be putting on a bigger dry fly, probably lower profile one, not too bushy, casting ahead of an individual fish that's cruising, because you can see it's marking its lanes, you can see it's going to come up ahead, and stripping it long strips, long 12 to 16 inch strips, so that your fly's making a V-wake, and you're intercepting those flies. You're bringing the fly across the face of the fish so he sees it. He sees the silhouette on the surface of the water. That would be the ideal situation and tactics to use.
Depth is a critical key to all Stillwater presentations, and especially chironomid fishing. I've got my sounder here in the boat with me. We're anchored presently in about 9 feet of water. On the way in, notice that it drops off into deeper water, so I'm just trying to work my fly. I've got them hung right now. I've got 2 chironomids on, a large one, about a number 10, and a smaller number 14, and I'm just suspending them under an indicator right now and slowly creeping them back to the boat using that slow hand twist retrieve we talked about. We've got chironomids actually emerging here now. I can see shucks on the surface, and we've got egg-laying females coming back for the evening. They often lay their eggs in the afternoon hours when the wind lays down, and it makes it easier for them to lay their eggs, and also the risk of being picked off by a swallow or a nighthawk is greatly reduced.
These are my thoughts on the ABCs of fishing chironomid pupa with a strike indicator. That is the easiest method to learn and to be the most successful fishing chironomids. A strike indicator allows you to present a chironomid pupil pattern at a very precise depth zone in the lake. For instance, if we are anchored in 15 feet of water, there's the depth, surface of the lake, bottom of the lake, 15 feet deep. As an angler, we don't know where in that 15 feet of water the trout are feeding. Are they feeding at 14.5 feet, at 14 feet, between 11 and 12 feet? And unfortunately, trout can be very specific in the depth zone they want to eat. That's just fishing. So we have to approach fishing with the indicator a bit scientifically. We want to start off by suspending our chironomid pupil patterns about 6 to 12 inches off the bottom. That's the first place we want to start fishing them. If we're not catching fish there, we're going to move our indicator lower so that we're 14, just hanging down 14 feet, so we're a foot off the bottom, and then we'll try 13 feet, and then we'll try 12 feet. And in some cases, they may be eating those chironomid pupa 5 feet under the surface. That's not the common situation. It's usually deeper, but we have to be prepared to try it. So we don't want to go out onto the water and just peg the indicator at a depth and not even think about it. We want to think about the distance we're fishing and then work progressively up in the water column. Egg-laden female chironomids like to come back to lakes in the late evenings when the water's calm to lay their eggs. And under the ideal situation, those fish will track, or you'll see a fish rise here, and then it's going to come up again and again when you can see they're taking a track, and you can present a fly ahead of that moving fish. In the worst scenario, the fish is rising here, it's rising there, and there's no pattern to its movement. And that can be pretty frustrating, trying to present stripping a egg-laden female imitation in front of him, because you don't know where he's going to be. What I would do in that situation is throw out the ugliest leech you've got, the flashiest one, and strip it through the water, and hopefully in front of someone's face, a big trout, and just give them a dessert item that happens to be swimming by.
Well, Jack's fishing with a clear intermediate and a couple of patterns. He's got a small scud pattern on and a leech pattern. And one of the important tricks you can learn when fly fishing still waters is counting the fly line and the flies down. And what that means is Jack has simply made his cast, and he's going to count to a preset figure he's determined based on the depth that we're fishing. We're about 9 feet here, and the known sink rate of the fly line. Typically the clear intermediates, depending on the manufacturer, sink from 1.5 inches to 2 inches per second. So he's just going to cast that line out, maybe let it sink 20 counts. You can use the sweep hand of your watch as a great technique as well, and then start your retrieve. If he doesn't touch bottom, or he doesn't get a take on his next cast, he may let it sink 25 seconds, and he may touch bottom. so he may want to let it only sink 23 seconds. What he's doing is systematically eliminating non-productive water and trying to get that fly and fly line traveling through the same consistent zone throughout his retrieve. And that's the key to being successful on still waters, is finding that depth the fish are holding at and consistently placing the fly there.
One of the things I do with a sinking line, no matter whether it's a full sinker, a type 6, 4, whatever, is that I stick my rod right straight down in the water. That'll help the sink rate, and I count by 21, 22, 23. You know, I'll pick like, 60 or whatever I want to be. But it's just about the second, 21, 22, 23. And then just work my way, go all the way deep, work my way up. But also when I come back, I change my strips. I'll maybe go a little fast at first, drop, then just try all different patterns of stripping. When I'm fishing these leeches and streamer type patterns on the bottom, I start fast first, and if I don't get anything, then I slow it down, and I do at least 2 to 3 casts per depth with different retrieves. So not only have I covered the depth, but I've also covered the types of retrieves, and I've done it. Maybe it'll only be 2 or 3, but I try it within the same strip, and I try to remember what strip really took the fish. And I can tell you from today, the strip that I was taking the fish on was 1 long, 2 shorts, 1 long, 2 shorts. Pause, 1 long, 2 strips, just had a strike then. And just kind of get a little bit of rhythm. I do notice that something different than in a river is in a lake. When I strip the leeches and streamers, I like the pauses, and I don't do that when I fish in a stream, because the fish are usually trying to get away from something chasing it. Here, they're just minding their business, aren't they?
Yeah, we're just trying to imitate a leech that's moving from point A to point B, and just happens to have an unfortunate encounter with a trout. Well, we are observing the wind has finally dropped, and we have, almost can take our sunglasses off now. We have fish moving around us, and we've even had the good fortune to have some come up within eyesight of the boat. We've seen how the fish are taking. They're coming up very slow and deliberate. We have lots of chironomids returning to the surface, laying their eggs, and the trout are just coming them up and taking them in meticulous slow rises. Typically you can see the tail sweep through the rise form. And what we're going to do here is we're going to put a small dry fly on that would suggest an adult chironomid, and behind it I've had good success putting a small soft hackle, so just any kind of scruffy fly. And what you can do is you can cast this out, leave it dead drift, leave it sit for about 10 or 15 seconds, give it a couple of quick twitches, make it as though it looks like an egg-laying female, because they often run along the surface like a little speedboat and lay their eggs. And the fish are drawn to that wake. They may not take the fly, but they can turn and take that soft hackle behind. You see we've got fish rolling right out here. So that's what we're going to do. Hopefully it works. He's coming my way, so I'm not, I could see the momentum. Check out another quadrant. Drift here for a sec.
So guys, I know it's the last light. You want to get the last bite before we have to get off the water. Fish are still sipping on those chironomids, but this is also a good time to give them something big and ugly. And leeches are a great choice. Naturally, leeches are undulating, swimming sinusoidally through the water. But in this situation or circumstances, what I would do is I'd be casting those leeches right into a foot of water, right on the bank, pulling them perpendicular away from the bank, moving that leech and showing it or presenting it to as many fish that are cruising parallel to the bank, back and forth as much as possible. And I'd be putting on something ugly, a lot of flashaboo, something bright and flashy. I'd have a bead head or a cone head, maybe even a fluorescent orange cone head on there, so that that fly with a loop knot is dipping and diving. And I'd be shaking up that retrieve, stripping fast, pausing, stripping fast, pausing. Something that they don't normally swim at that rate, but you're trying to attract the attention of the most aggressive fish that might be cruising the bank.
There's also small guys on the water too.
Yeah,
It's just which ones are they targeting?
A couple different sizes. You know, Phil, we've got the very end of the day. This is where it's going to happen. Before we use this last bit of light, we've got dark flies. Dark flies on lakes work best, don't
Well,
they?
especially in these conditions, Jack, because the light's coming from above, so they're going to be silhouetted really well.
That's
At
right.
this time of the day, color is not nearly as important, more a silhouette and the acoustic footprint that these flies push in the water. So we're using some bigger leeches, these big popsicle leeches, and lots of
I
marabou.
think you got it right here, babe.
Lots of marabou, and these flies, as we retrieve them, they open and close and pulse in the water, and they push water. And fish, trout at this time are not so much sight feeders. They are for the final kill shot, if you will, but they're going to use that lateral line to help them hone in on prey. So they're going to come up out of the depths and really patrol these shallows. So this is a great time for the intermediate lines and hopefully some big fish.
Look at that wake out there. They're still out there chasing things
Look at that wake.
in the middle. You're in Big Trout Central right now. They're not done yet, these fish.
Oh no, they'll feed. You know, on some special evenings, where regulations permit, because some areas of the continent don't allow fishing after dark.
California, believe it or not. Ah, I feel so sorry for those people.
Because they're missing some great fishing. I've been out on the lake till 2 in the morning when the leeches are on, and it's just an incredible experience fighting fish in the dark. You think he's to the left, he's to the right. You think he's in front of you, he's on the other side of the boat. It's very exciting, and some very large fish come out to play at those hours.
Well, I'll tell you, I've had some of the most fun times in Alberta because you guys are so far north than where we are. You know, fishing 11:30, 12 o'clock, and be like it is right now.
Well, I know I've been up where I live in Edmonton. It's just like that. And you've gone out for 5-6 hours of fishing in the evening, and you look down at your watch and it's almost midnight. And you go, oh man, I've got to go to work.
I know. I'll tell you, most of the fish, the way they hit here, and I'm so used to brown trout smacking it in a river, and they don't do that here.
No, they're lazy feeders. They're big.
Boy,
they're big fat fish. They know that they can pretty well outswim anything in the neighborhood. So they don't. The only time you really see them chase is when they're on minnows.
I couldn't make him a believer. Ooh, no!
No, right at the rod tip. Oh man.
I couldn't make him a believer. He wouldn't follow my line or swallow my line. Boy, those were good. Those were really good hits. Just classics, though.
It's amazing sometimes when they whack it like that, you think, how can they not get hooked up?
Well, it almost feels like bottom. Then the bottom pulls back a little.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go back over here. I had one bump there, and I had the encounters of the trout type over here. Close encounters of the trout type.
Yeah,
Not quite in as far. Well, how'd you like that maneuver? If one is going to fall in, I think it's better during the day, don't you think?
I guess if you had to pick.
Good work. I just had the same
Yahoo!
hit. You keep that on. I just had another hit. Let's see if we can get a double hitter here.
That'll be all right.
Holy cow, why did it hit the same time? He said, I got a hit, and bam, I got a hit.
Well, he put it. Oh, look at that big dorsal.
All right. All right.
He played with that, or you would tap, 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 tap,
That's
tap,
what
tap.
mine was doing.
And I finally went, okay, enough. Let's see if you will.
Commit.
Let's commit, and I'm committed. So like
right.
you did earlier, I just stripped it, and that right into the.
Let me have your clicker. We're going to get this guy in a little closer to shore. Fighting here. How do I stop it?
Yep, you push the propeller again.
No, we're not right exactly the same way now.
We'll just drift it. He's still got some fight left. Yeah.
Well, what a way to end a beautiful day.
Yes.
I keep wanting to catch fish now. I think we go back up there and nail another one.
Well, the light's starting to fade, and these fish will cruise into the shallows.
Oh, man. Well, it was so funny is because you got to stick with it with the lake. You just can't give up.
Nope. Especially when we saw the amount of fish moving we did. We knew it was only a matter of time.
Well, you know, we've learned a lot today, Phil. It's been a great day. It's been a tough day. You know, we've come to a lake that we've never fished before. I guess I'm supposed to net this, aren't I? Fully proportioned.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we've learned a lot. We've learned about structure. We've learned about chironomid. But it looks like, to me, the fly of the day, at least today, has been the leech.
The leech. There he is. Ooh.
I see him, but he's still down deep. Okay, bring your body in.
There's his head up.
Head up. And...
Whoa! Should go head first.
Too heavy. Well, that's why you go lake fishing.
All right.
Wow, what a way to end a great trip.
Certainly is.
We stayed with it. We hadn't been on this lake. We learned a lot. We'll have to tell Master Yoda how well you did.
Yeah, he's around here somewhere, I'm sure. And this is one, as we like to say, that is a full-figured rainbow.
I think that must be his mate.
He wants him to come home, so we'll let him go back. We'll let him eat some more scuds, some more minnows, a few more 1,000 chironomids, and who knows, he could be even larger.
Well, that's pretty big. I think you can't be unhappy with a fish that size anywhere in the world.
No, he's got to be 3 inches across.
Oh, yeah.
And a good 5-6 inches down the sides.
Heavy fish. I couldn't even pick him up.
No, he is a...
It was so funny, there must have been 2 of them following, because you were saying, I got a strike. I said, I had a strike. Boom, boom, and then you stuck him. That was great.
That was fantastic. There he goes.
Ooh,
there he goes.
All right, congratulations. Well, I've smelled chicken wings.
I think I have a problem.
rumors that people were bringing us chicken wings and salad and a great, probably some Albertan beef.
I hope so.
I think somebody ordered a hamburger. Nothing like service.
No.